I don't regret anything in my life. Nothing.
How did you happen to go into this service? What happened?
I was drafted.
Okay.
I got the greetings,
Uh-huh.
and and that was amazing. I got turned July 15th. I turned 18, and that same day, Dad took me up to the courthouse, and I had to sign in right away. You know, when you turned 18. Well, it's crazy, but July the 19th, I got my greetings.
That didn't take long.
No, no, I think they got them sitting there waiting for you to sign up. So, but anyhow, they had that, but then they didn't. They sent a notice that I was going to be drafted, but then I didn't have to. I think it was November the 8th was when I got finally the call to go. And you traveled by train all the time. They didn't have planes then, see.
Where did you go then?
Then I went to, first I went in at Fort Snelling in Minneapolis. That's where I went in. And the funny thing about it is there was a young fella that lived on the east side here in Waterloo, and his mother came to me and she says, and his name was Marvin Baldwin. And he came up and she said, can you look after him? And I didn't know from nothing. I mean, I was never even around him. So we went up by train and everything to Minneapolis, and then we came home and was home for 2 days. Then we went back to Minneapolis, and then we got on a train there and went to Camp Fannin, Texas. And that's where I trained, in Camp Fannin, Texas.
What do you remember about your basic training?
Well, one thing I remember is that I made up my mind when I went in that I was going to enjoy every bit of it. And I sure did, because that made it so much easier. And we had a young fellow that he just fought it all the way. And he was miserable. He was absolutely miserable. But I went at it and I thought, well, I'm going to be the best there is. Well, I came out and I never had fired Dad had a single shot 22 with a little short shell. Well, my uncles would come out to the farm and they'd do target practice. When the folks would go to town on Saturday, well, then we'd crawl on hands and knees all over the yard looking for a shell that hadn't been fired. Then we'd take and shoot it at the tail in the windmill. And one day Dad says, I wonder how all those holes got in there. But anyhow, I came out as an expert rifleman then, because I did it the way they wanted me to do it, see.
And what type of weapon were you
Oh,
using?
that was the old Army Garand rifle.
Okay.
Yep, that was the old standby then, which is still one of the best rifles that they have ever had, you know. And we didn't have machine guns except a 30 caliber or a 50 caliber, and who wants to carry one of those things around? Those were pretty heavy in those days. And 50 caliber was always water cooled. But no, I, I just enjoyed it because to me it was like schooling. I mean, I learned to stand straight and walk straight and do a 30-inch step with my squad leader, he had big long legs and he had to slow down and I had to stretch in order to make my 30-inch step. But no, then I came home when I got done there, I came on delayed, what they call a delayed route, and got home, and my older brother had joined the Navy earlier, and he I went out of Bremerton, Washington on a little baby flat top called the USS Amity Bay. The first trip out into the war, they went to the Coral Sea, and a kamikaze pilot flew down the funnel and sunk the ship. Tony was blown free, and he come up in the oil fires and burned his lungs, all his hair off, and he had shrapnel wounds and everything. And then he got a Bronze Star for helping other people out of the fire there. But and then he died at age 50 because he had emphysema. But that was caused from that stuff. See, the start of it. But he happened to be home on 30-day leave from Bethesda, Maryland, where the hospital is, and he came home, and we were together for those 10 days before I shipped out. And then we went out of Fort Meade, Maryland. And
did you know where you were going, or
yeah, I knew that I was going to Europe
Uh-huh.
because we found out that um, General MacArthur didn't want anybody from Fort Hood or Camp Fannin, Texas. He says they're burned out before they get here. We would take 20-mile hikes, you know. And we had a guy that, I don't know if you ever saw the guy that used to be in the movies, Joey Brown, had a big mouth and everything. Well, we had a sergeant. Our sergeant was just like him. And he always stayed close. And if my pack had slip on me, well, he'd come over there and yank it back up and tighten me up and everything like that so I could keep on going. I was the smallest guy in the whole outfit. But then after I got out of my basic training, I went in at 128 pounds and come out of there at 145, and so that was it.
So you got a little
Muscle, that
yeah.
was it. Yep, yep.
So tell me about the trip over. What was that like?
Okay, we got into, when we were at Fort Meade, Maryland, then we went and got onto a troop ship. There was 7,500 of us, and it was called the USS Hermitage. And what it was an Italian luxury liner that had been converted to a troop ship, which they stripped everything out and you're down the middle. And you stood all the way. You never sat eating or anything, and always had to stand and eat. And when I went to board ship, I had all our pack and everything like that. There's a little swabby, little Navy guy at the thing, and he had hash marks up his arm like you couldn't believe for all the years. And he said to me, he says, "Have you ever been aboard ship before?" And I said, "No." And he says, "Well," he says, "I'm going to give you a little advice." He says, "If you'll take it." I said, "Okay." And he says, "Now," he says, "you get seasick awful easy." He said, "What you want to do is when you get to your place where you're going to sleep," he says, "well, take your GI Bill out of your GI towel out of your bag, you wad it up, put it under your belt, and tighten it up as tight as you can tighten it. That keeps your stomach from moving. That's why you get seasick."
Really?
That's right. And I never got seasick all
Oh my gosh.
the way. And we were 15 days going over because we were being followed by a German wolf pack. And we'd gone over towards England, and then we went all the way down to to Africa, and then back, and then we ended up in Le Havre, France. That's how
So
we got.
what's a wolf pack? Is that
Oh, that's submarines, yeah,
submarines?
right.
Okay. So
There probably might be a dozen of them in there. See, and I'd go up on top, and here we're in front of this convoy. We had a convoy, and next time they come up, we're in the back of it, or we're on one side, or on the other side, or something. But they just kept changing all the time. See, and the destroyers were racing around like speedboats all over the place, you know. So, but they never hit anything, you know, that while we were in that. But they sure were chasing them away.
So when did you finally arrive at Le Havre?
I can't remember the day. It was 2 days before the war ended.
Okay.
And
So it was like May of 1945?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And so then we got off there, and we had to go up to what they call Camp Lucky Strike. And that's the one where the guys would come home on, see. Then that's where I joined, was put into the 102nd Infantry, L Company. And then we rode by 40 and 8s for 4 days and 5 nights across Germany. And we were all over Germany because the railroads are so bombed out and everything. They had to find their pick ways to get through. And then we got into up on the Elbe River, and that's where we debarked. And the Russians were on the other side, and they were all bristled up. They wanted to come on. And so we got off, and then we were there. And so we were there for, I don't know, summer's about, I'd say, maybe 2 weeks. Then we went to Passau, Germany, on the Elbe River. And so then we were there for a while because they had a big prisoner camp for the SS prisoner camp there. And so we were guards at that prisoner camp.
What do you remember about that? Can you tell me about
Oh, that thing there was they had this they took bulldozers and they dug this huge, big like a lake, but there's no water in it or anything, but all the sides. And then they had up on top, they had all the fencing around it, 2 rows of fencing, of and but then they had all these prisoners down inside of there, so they couldn't get out. They didn't, you know, because they tried to get out of there. See, but it. Oh yeah, in fact, I had to stand guard in there, and I was scared to death. You know, I didn't know what was going to happen. That's the first time I was ever really shook up. But then from there, I then it was 29 days. I was with the 102nd, and then they deactivated the 102nd, and the whole division came home. Well, if I'd have been there 30 days, I could have come back with the division. So, but they didn't. So then I was sent to the 3rd Battalion, 18th Infantry Headquarters Company of the 1st Division, and was at Coburg, Germany. And I was put in communications. Now, for a guy that didn't know a radio from a telephone, you know, they put you where you got the most experience, I suppose. They put me in there, and that's where I had to learn that. And on all the line companies they had around were 35 miles every direction, and had our own switchboard. And so then I was there until the 2 men that were, they didn't have enough points to go home first. They had to wait for time. So they came to me one day and he said, well, Don, he says, you got 1 month. He says, you got to learn this thing because we're going home. And so I did. So then I was put in charge of communications, and I was still a buck private. So then it went on, and within 3 months, I was a buck sergeant because that's what it called for. So I was bounced right on up, you know. But when I was in charge then, they gave me, and I never drove a car before or anything, and the first thing they did was give me a driver's license and a Jeep. And I had to learn how to drive that Jeep.
How did you do that? Did somebody teach you? Or?
No, you just get out there in the field and go ahead and drive it. Shift it and learn how. But it was something, though. We had, we in our communications was in a little town where it's called Berkunstadt, Germany. And they had a displaced persons camp. And this, they were men and everything. They were just all men. Women were in another one, someplace else. See, and so whenever we had our telephone or poles fall down or something like that, we'd go over there, and we would get help out of there. Everybody wanted to come out because they'd work all day for a candy bar, a pack of cigarettes, or a bar of soap, and so we'd take as many as we needed. We had plenty of them. We'd just take them out. We had a guy that was a taxi driver out of Chicago that his dad had died in Austria in 1938, and so he went back there with his wife, and who was pregnant at that time, and he got there, and then Hitler wouldn't let him out. So then they put him in a different place, sent her to somebody else, and all he saw when the baby was born was just the baby. He had never seen her, see. So I had him, I'd go get him, and he run the switchboard because he was American. I mean, he could speak English very well. So this happened, and a good friend of mine was Sergeant John T. Bottoms. He was from St. Louis, Missouri, and he was in charge of all the food stuff for the division, see. So I'd go in there and pick up my rations and take them out for 7 days. I'd have to drive in there and pick it up in Coburg. And and so I told him about this, and the guy's name was Philip Fruand. And I said, I got them, and I says, he has never seen his little girl. And his wife had been separated since 1938. So he says, I'll see what I can do. Now, this was Holy Thursday. And so he says, I'll see what I can do. By gollies, you know, I got a call on the switchboard. He says, I want you to come in here tomorrow morning. And so that was Good Friday. So I went on in, and he says, I found out where she's at. And it was 65 miles from where we were. And but he says, and I said, oh, I says, I got to take him over there. And he says, well, he says, I figured that. So he gets out this big box, puts it in the back of the Jeep, and he has a ham and all kinds of foods and a couple of bottles of wine and all that. He had done all of this stuff. And so he says, and he put a tarp over it, and he says, and I says, well, I says, I'm going to take him tomorrow morning over there, see. And it was Good Friday. So I got a hold of Philip, and I said, Philip, I says, I got to go to this place. I says, it's about 65 miles away. But he says, I says, I don't understand German. I says, I need somebody that can talk it and know what I'm looking for. And so we pulled up to this place, and it was like a motel, but they were actually living units, like a kitchen and a living room and a bedroom and stuff. And they just had the doors to the outside. And I stopped at this one. I said, I want you to go up there and check who's living in there. In that one, I said, see if it coincides with what I have. So he gets out, goes up there, knocks on the door, and his wife comes to the door, and you could knock his eyes off with a stick. This poor guy, it was a dug on this thing, you know, and he cried, and his wife cried, and his little girl was, well, she was 38, so she was what, 48, 46. It was 40, 40, 46, yeah, 44, 45. And so she, that's the first time he'd seen her since the baby. And they came back, and I said to Philip, I walked up to the door. I says, well, I got something in the Jeep for you here, see? So he goes out there, and I give him this box. And I told him, and I says, I'm going to come back and pick you up on the Easter Sunday evening. And you couldn't give that guy $1 million. And so we did that, and I went back and got him again on that deal. Well, he ended up back in the United States when